This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is Friday the 13th, the 13th of November 2020, and I am 2J.
I'm 2M.
And I am Miss K, your host. Again, in case you missed them, here are today's headlines.
Yep.
Daily Nation, I've seen our future.
Yes.
Standard, UHURU pushes for consensus. And The Star, this is how my legacy will look like, says UHURU.
Yes.
Let's start with the vision of the future, Daily Nation.
Yes, Daily Nation, I've seen your future. And Prof likes to say this. What's that thing? If you create your future? What do you say?
I think that you should have known what the quote was before you opened that trap for yourself.
It just showed up
and then
in my
decided
mind.
to rely on us to help you finish it.
There's no aggregate memory here.
I got it. If you want to create it, no, for you, if you want to predict your future, you have to create it.
There we go. All right.
I got it. Look, the headline was, I have seen our future. So yesterday, President Uhuru Kenyatta likened himself to Moses in the Bible. And he said, like Moses in the Bible, who sat at the top of Mount Nebo, and saw the future that the people of Israel were about to cross into the promised land. I too have seen our future. This is what our future looks like. A Kenya where no one will ascend to higher public office on account of their tribe, where no capable person will wallow in poverty because of poor governance, where our potential as a people will be exploited for the greatness of our nation, and where we will all share equitably in the prosperity of our nation. It's a fantastic.
Powerful words.
And see what I took from it is, he said something that we are transiting from a nation of net consumers to a nation of net producers. He's saying this. Kenya is on a platform. You know, have you seen like the spaceships at NASA taking off? They're on a platform, and the nuclear engines are pumping, the pistons are pumping, and it's about takeoff is just about to happen. And that's exactly where we're going. We are going into
Kenya is the spaceship.
Yes, and we are going into first world territory.
Yeah.
And not backwards into 13th century one-wheeled machines.
You know, as much as I really did enjoy this article in the Daily Nation, but I think we also have to be reminded about the fate of Moses, right?
Yes.
I think we can't forget that, because for doubting God, for disobeying God, Moses never got to see the promised land.
But at least he got to see it from a distance. He was able to look into the future and see what the promise that God had given.
Yeah, but of course, we do remember Moses as like the epitome of leadership, right? Yes. So I think that we can put
also mountaintops give us perspective. So you don't need to take that morbid view of it. Is it Friday the 13th?
Yeah.
Today,
okay.
if I knew
Standard.
the Bible.
Standard. Uhuru pushes for consensus.
Yes, Uhuru pushes for consensus. Keeping the peace. President tones down political rhetoric with major achievements of his government, dishes out goodies to new businesses, and rallies leaders to put public interests first. And I think for me, what really stood out in the State of the Nation address, which was the 7th one so far, was that the president really didn't address BBI. I think at most he said that we should really constructively and objectively look at it, but I think to that end he didn't really talk about it that much, which I think was a great thing, because the State of the Nation is supposed to be talking about the moment that we are in.
Absolutely.
BBI is yet to pass. We're yet to see what will happen. Who knows, maybe we'll be talking about the State of the Nation in regards to BBI next year. And so they talk about how the president really focused on the Big Four agenda. And he said that at best, by the time he leaves office in 2022, his administration would have only laid the ground for the takeoff. I think that's the ship that 2M is talking about,
Absolutely.
right?
Well, those processes are not done by one administration. Even the spaceship reference that we've been given
They're
here,
perpetual.
They're perpetual. One administration hands over to the next. So he's also saying that whoever comes in next, please do not piss over my plans, like the proverbial snowball.
Wow.
But I think also what he was talking about is, he said that it may not be realistic for all of these pillars within the Big Four to be achieved in just one term. And I think that it was quite amazing that a leader could be honest in such a way. And I think a lot of the time as us humble beings, we look at honesty as a sign of weakness, but I think we should flip that and see honesty as a sign of integrity. I think that it's a signal that he's being honest with the people in regards to what he is able to do in the time that he has been given. So I think that I agree with it. He is pushing for consensus, and consensus is not the absence of disagreement. I think Kenyans need to understand that. Consensus doesn't mean that you can't come to the table. Of course there will be disagreement, there will be discussion. It just means that we're doing it towards some shared goals, some shared values. So
Absolutely.
Kenyans and people who live in Karen need to stop complaining.
Wow. Before I ask you what you think about this headline, I want to remind us we have a 3-part criteria that we use to judge the headlines. We ask ourselves 3 questions. Is this headline topical or is it speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? What do we say about the Daily Nation?
I like the Daily Nation.
I love the Daily Nation.
Let's put it in the parking bay.
Yes.
What do we say about the Standard?
Parking bay as well. Let's see what the Star has to
Star
offer.
holds.
Okay,
Yes.
finally. This is how my legacy will look like, says UHURU, and here they just do a rundown, just like all the other headlines I've done, of what he said, but here there was a focus on education, where they speak about the progress of the national examinations in March to April next year.
Yeah.
He also talks about the things that the president will do in the education sector. So he pledged to decongest the schools in 24 months. They aim to construct at least 12,500 classrooms and related facilities under new cost-effective guidelines that are to be developed by the Ministry of Education and Transport. He also urged the MPs to chip in to address these gaps in the education sector from their constituency development funds. He also spoke about the reduction in the textbook ratio. The textbook ratio of grade 1 to 3 has moved to 1:1, and he said that the journey has begun to change our curriculum that is fitted for the refinements we want to take and implement that.
Can we just toss the Star?
Yeah, we toss the Star.
I think very far.
I think you could tell from the lack of enthusiasm from 2M and I.
Yes.
Toss
Toss
the
it.
Star.
Very far. And
What do we
also
do to the Standard?
Atayo Tupa.
Toss it as well.
Yeah.
So I take out the Star, I take out the Standard, and that leaves us with the Daily Nation as our winning headline. And now onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. As with the headlines, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to break them down for you. We ask ourselves, are they humorous or dry? Are they satirical or pessimistic? And finally, are they effective or just plain lazy?
Yes, and the Daily Nation Dula is such a rubbish cartoon, and but I'll describe it anyway. It's a caricature of Uhuru Kenyatta drawn as a broken record, and Uhuru as a tone arm of a record player, which is playing a record for the State of the Nation address. And oh my goodness, it's such a rubbish cartoon. And the caption there is State of the Nation address. I mean, come on, Dula, get some manners. You do not say, what are you trying to say? That the people are not listening to the president yesterday? A lot of us are very interested in what he had to say. It was an audit of what has happened in the past 1 year. So,
and I think that's the point that a lot of people
are forgetting,
missed, right?
Yeah.
I think that you can call him a broken record all you want, but he was merely doing his job.
And a job that we asked him to do.
And the point of the State of the Nation address is to tell you about the state of the nation, and it is to encompass what has happened in that year. And so for the president to repeat figures, accomplishments, and whatnot that have happened in this 1 year, what do you people expect? You know, Kenyans are such a tough crowd. You know, you give them one thing, they're upset. You give them what they wanted, they're still upset. So
I think it should just be shown the
Toss
contempt
it.
card.
And so yes, with contempt, I guess we throw the Daily Nation.
Absolutely. Standard. You have a caricature of Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto, and Raila Odinga. And they're playing cards.
Playing poker,
They're playing poker, and behind them is a crowd of people. But cartoon number 1, you have William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta on one side, and Raila Odinga on the other side. To number 2, same crowd. You have William Ruto on one side and Raila and Uhuru on the other side. And the caption there is spot the difference. I think this is quite lazy from Gado, honestly.
Guys, this is from the archives.
This is from the archives.
Gado had absolutely nothing to do. I don't know if he's trying to make reference to the handshake.
Yeah.
Because if it was in that case, this cartoon would have been more suitable on the 10th of March, 2018, the day after the handshake happened. But on the 13th of March, November, you know, I don't understand it.
Absolutely.
Can we toss it?
Toss it.
Yes.
All right, finally.
The Star, you have caricature of Uhuru Kenyatta depicted as Moses, and he has spotted that is Kenya, but it's BBI on one side and the other side is a blank page. And oh my goodness, the caption there is, and Moses parted the path for the future of a Kenya light. I think this is a great cartoon.
No, it's not.
It's not.
It is
Look,
not.
The truth of the matter.
The fact that you even struggled
Also,
to
bearing in
describe
mind that he is hovering over a coronavirus blob.
But you see, the truth of the matter is this is where we're going. In no time, guys, we will have a referendum. And maybe Uhuru Kenyatta did not say it as much yesterday, but I think that's the future of this country in the next 6 to
And Moses parted the path for the future of Kenyalites.
On that line alone, I say we toss
Kenyalites.
it.
Okay.
On that line alone.
On second thoughts, that's a rubbish critique.
Terrible.
On that line alone, toss it. And we have no winning cartoon. And now on to our final thought. But before we go there, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled In Defense of Housing, The Politics of Crisis by Peter Marquise and David Madden. It's Morogos, man.
Ms. K, would you like to give us the summary of the week?
Definitely. This week we're looking at the Big Four and we're taking lessons from other countries on how we could implement or do better what they did. You cannot invent something, do it better. On Monday we did while we were away. On Tuesday we were doing The Healing of America, a global quest for better, cheaper and fairer healthcare by T.R. Reid. This was to look at the universal healthcare pillar of the Big Four.
Yeah.
On Wednesday we did Asia's Next Giant, South Korea and Late Industrialization by Alice H. Amsden. This was looking at the manufacturing pillar. Yesterday we looked at Stuffed and Starved, the hidden battle for the world food systems by Raj Patel. This was looking at food security. And today
we look at In Defense of Housing, the Politics of Crisis, and of course the remaining pillar of the Big Four, affordable housing.
Yeah.
And so I think we can all agree that everybody needs housing.
Yeah.
But not everybody can afford it.
Yes.
And if you're willing to call that a crisis, then I think it's safe to say that there is a housing crisis in almost every major city in the world. Maybe not every major city, I would say every city in the world.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how did this happen and how can we fix this? What can we do about it? And so in this book, the defense of housing is the definitive statement that the authors have come up with.
Yes.
And so Peter Marquise is a leading urban planner and David Madden is a sociologist. And they look at the causes and consequences of the housing problem and they detail the need for progressive alternatives immediately.
Yeah.
The housing crisis, they say, cannot be solved by minor policy shifts. They rather say that the housing crisis has a deep political and economic roots, and therefore it requires a radical response in order to change it for the better. And so if we say that everybody needs and deserves housing, but today our houses are being transformed into commodities, this means that the inequalities of the city are ever more acute, they're ever more obvious. And profit has become more important than the social need of having, a roof over your head.
Yeah.
And so the poor are the poor are forced to pay more for worse housing, and communities are faced with the violence of displacement and gentrification.
Yeah.
And so the benefits of decent housing are only available to those who can afford it. And so in this book, they present their case, arguing that housing should be treated as a fundamental human right, that it should be removed from the market and distributed according to need rather than wealth, rather than what's in your pocket.
Yeah.
And so the book begins with what they call the commodification of housing, and they criticize this. And this means that a structure's function as real estate takes precedence over its usefulness as a place to live. So we look at a building and say, how much money can I get from it? Rather than I look at this building and say, how many people can live here safely? And so for them, this commodification of housing is a root cause of the crisis. It elevates the housing's value as a form of exchange rather than, as a function of dwelling. And so it makes it something that you invest in or something that you make money in. And they say that this is very problematic because if we are to focus on universal access as a form for housing, then we're not doing this in the right way. It should not be on your ability to pay for a house, but on your ability to have a need for a house. And so they look at some of the resistance towards these trends that we're seeing. And they give an example such as the rent strikes in Glasgow in 1915, where large numbers of the city's residents refused to pay rent until the state committed to making housing more widely available and cheaper. However, they argue that some of these things are only, very short-lived. I think that these people were able to get rent reduction for a short time, but then the government went back on it and they were back up to these skyrocketed rates.
Absolutely.
But I think that this book really just presents some interesting examples and food for thought on how you can successfully and equitably give affordable housing as an option to people. And I think that Kenya can learn a lot from this.
I agree with some of the stuff that you've said. I disagree with some of the stuff you've said, especially about
it's not my opinion.
About markets. No, it's what he said.
It's their argument.
What you have rendered about what he has said. But the chapter I liked, and I'll have a crazy solution for that. The chapter I liked was on residential oppression, in chapter 3. And he says something fundamental. He says, all revolutions are germinated in the slums. Every riot is a slum riot. All right, and his point here is housing is always more than just housing, right? It provides shelter, but more importantly, it is an instrument for politics.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is why you see RUTO going to incite people in their dilapidated quarters and calls them fellow hustlers. Never mind, he himself stays in a mansion. But anyway, now the reason he says is because of something called residential oppression, and residential oppression points to the relationship between the provision of housing and the power to rule. Now, he says that housing can provide the material basis for oppression, domination, and equality. Now, what he's also telling us is this. It's very simple, that good housing, or lack thereof of good housing, provides fertile grounds for political exploitation. And then I ask, what is a remedy for this exploitation? Now, I have an idea. And that idea still involves exploitation. Exploitation will happen. And by the way, sometimes exploitation is not such a bad thing, right? Now, I want to ask you people this. Now, imagine a situation where all informal settlements, Kibera, Mathare, Mukuru kwa Jenga, are sold to big multinationals, right? Now,
the land or the slum?
No, the whole land. You see, you take Kibera on all its acreage, you take Mathare, all its acreage, and you sell it to this multinational. Okay. But then, you place conditions on these multinationals and say, buy this land, build and maintain nice habitable shelters for your labor, because that is a labor camp, all right? Pay them a certain amount of money per month that is decent. And then the condition here is they don't pay tax for 15 years. So you give them a tax break, right? And as you do that, you pass a law and you say that informal settlements and slums are banned in Kenya forthwith. Right now, here's what you're going to do.
Except the ones you construct.
Yes, you see, housing cannot exist without labor. All right, and there has to be demand for that labor. Now, imagine the biggies, Samsung, for example, going to Mathare, creating a huge factory, and then they're given a condition to create labor camps or houses that are very decent for them to stay, and they're told, don't pay tax for as long as you pay these people well and you maintain their shelters, then you can have the whole of Kibera, but of course at a cost. Then you will have sorted the housing problem. But the reason I'm saying that is also this. See, I don't believe government can solve a housing problem anywhere in the world right now. All right, and that's because, I mean, we are used to government being the biggest employer, but right now private sector is the biggest employer. Government at some point in the 60s and 70s would have provided housing for all its employees, but right now it's impossible. And yes, government can build a brick and mortar, but government isn't capable of actually maintaining that brick and mortar. So the best thing to do is just leave it to markets to decide this.
Okay, I think I would be right to say that this is an imperfect plan
to
come up with.
It is,
and because of that, and I think you're very willing to admit that, I will not attack it on all the many fronts that I believe I could. Number one being quality of life, living next to a factory.
I thought number one would be the fact that those people have no ownership. Their dignity is still in contravention.
Let me paint a picture to you. Currently, do you know, guys, on average, that this country has less than 30,000 mortgages every single year, 30,000 mortgages.
On a population of 47
million. On a population of 47 million people. Like, there are actually less than 500,000 mortgages in this country. What does that tell you? People have problems with the access to credit, to be able to build their own homes. Literally, we are saying that going forward in the next 100 years, the way constantly, we will not have people owning their own homes.
So wait, in your scenario, is Samsung allowing me to own my home?
No.
Or do I pay rent?
You pay rent to Samsung, you're only getting a tax relief.
You know what will happen?
Yes.
Yeah, Samsung will pay these fellows to feel like they, at some point, it's market conditions. Samsung will pay these fellows to feel like they're living in decent homes. You see, it's also the poverty of dignity.
I'm asking about ownership.
You see, ownership will come later, but first you have to sort out the poverty of dignity. Do you know, guys, there are actually people in this country that throw their refuse from one corner of a house to another in a paper bag, all right? For that guy to own their own house, it is not going to take 5 years or 10 years. It's going to happen within a small generation.
How about we let Ms. K tell us about some of the radical
but I
things
think
that they have.
You guys like my radical solution as well.
No, we do not. I particularly do not like it. I'll talk about what they talk at the end. They talk about for a radical right to housing. And here they say that a right to housing is enshrined in Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948. And that language acknowledging the responsibility of states to provide adequate housing. States, I repeat, not the private sector, adequate housing for their citizenry appears in the national constitutions of 69 countries, Kenya being one of them. Article 43 of our own constitution states that every person has the right to accessible and adequate housing and to reasonable standards of sanitation, speaking to your newspaper bag throwing analogy.
I'm glad you're giving yourself solutions.
But an interesting fact, I want to bring something interesting fact here. In the United States, each state has its own written constitution. You can imagine the drama we would have if each of our 47 counties had their own constitutions. I'll not go there. However, in New York, the New York Constitution declares that the aid, care, and support of the needy are public concerns and shall be provided by the states. So in 1979, a case was put in place. It was Callahan versus Carey, a suit filed on behalf of 6 homeless men. The case ended in a decree by the court establishing a legally enforceable constitutional right to shelter in the state of New York. However, merely declaring that something is a universal right, for such as housing, is not the same as enforcing it. Now I go to your problem to them. There is a contradiction, and I have to repeat. They say this
my
is
problem or my solution.
Your solution. There is a contradiction.
Bring it on.
Between the provision of housing for all people and the means that are supposed to provide this housing, which is what? Market systems and capitalist states, which is your solution. Your
What's wrong with that?
Solution.
See, I made that right there.
Wait, didn't I give you time?
A
real right to housing needs to take the form of an ongoing effort to democratize and decommodify housing. You are planning on commodifying it. And to end the alienation and in some instances discrimination that exists in the housing system that we have. Let me give you an example. In the US, there's consensus that real estate markets and housing policy helped create the disadvantages faced by black families. And this is a fact. Why? Black families paid a rent premium of 40% relative to white families living in the same area. And if the family wanted to buy the house, they paid a premium of 15% more than any white family who wanted to buy a same house or a similar house in that neighborhood. Now, if you don't believe me, please go watch Netflix, the racial gap explainer on the racial wealth gap. And you will see that one of the first places to start, if you want to change the fortunes of your family, is to not have to worry about putting a roof over their heads. And for this reason, if we want to change the fortunes of our country, Uhuru Kenyatta was very right when he said that the state must be as part of the solution of giving this right.
Fantastic.
That's why we have a whole pillar on affordable housing.
I actually think
500,000 new houses for Kenyan families. Reduce the cost of ownership by 50%.
The truth of the matter is this. The truth of the matter is this. If government today goes to Park Road in Ngara and creates those houses and says that each of those houses is a 2-bedroom house going for 15,000 bob, even the guy in Mathare or Kibera, we're not going to afford it. It's only the middle class who are going to afford it. Point is simple. Private sector, and by the way, government has just built 1,000 units of those houses. Point is simple. The only way to sort this thing out is markets. Government is incapable of sorting out, unless there is a housing scheme or a housing fund that government can come up with to have people access credit cheaper than what banks are offering.
Isn't that
then
what we're doing?
That's a way of doing it.
If I could just say,
you cannot give everything to government to do. And by the way, at the basic level, the reason the role of government is to ensure a conducive environment for markets to work.
We will argue on the role of government, whether it should be overbearing or whether it should be reduced until thine kingdom comes.
Government should be reduced. Government should be reduced. And it has been reduced by markets.
For this reason, today we had a winning headline from the Daily Nation and no winning cartoon. Somebody debate 2M later.
God, 2M isn't our president, right? He's selling us off to the Samsungs and the PGs of the world.
Very fast.
Let me end on a lighter note. On a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, it says, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, 2M. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little." Have a great weekend.